This is good, isn't it? Nice to have it be on your kitchen table, Katie. This is lovely.
Thank you, welcome.
Yeah, lovely cup of tea as well. So we're here to just chat, aren't we, Corinne, about you're now our children and youth pastor. Woohoo!
It's very exciting.
It's
Wonderful.
really exciting.
But what we normally do in induction is we do the story. So it's the church tells a story, you tell a story, then maybe somebody else tells a story. But you said you didn't want it to be boring. You didn't want it to be like a normal boring minister like me. You wanted it to be a little bit different and not as long.
I think, the length of the service was very important to me. Keep it short.
Keep it short. Keep it short. So we're going to tell the story, and Corinne, you'll have a lot to play in this, because as I've only obviously journeyed with the church for 20 months, but it's always had a high priority of children and youth, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And lots of other children's workers, youth workers, that kind of thing.
We've been, as a church, I can't tell you how privileged we've been. And even, a lot of that story for us. It started with brigades, and then we even had youth groups and stuff like that from very early on. I don't wish to say quite how many years I've been with the church, but I was even brought up with this through the Sunday schools and then the brigades myself, and was part of the youth group. Ended up being the youth leader myself for a very short period of time. I could have. And so, we've always had the blessing of a lot of children. And just seems that the love and the priority that we've shown on them has been just paid back to us tenfold with how many still come.
And you were here, so long have you been part of BBC?
I think it's about 22 years, 23 years.
But you came as an intern, is that right?
Yeah, so I came as a youth volunteer, a year-out volunteer with Girls Brigade.
Right.
So I'd been working in London and for various reasons felt that wasn't something that I wanted to do anymore, and I went on a weekend away and felt God speaking to me through a man named Dennis Pethers, who, since I know has been very involved in this church, but at the time he was the chaplain for Girls Brigade, and he was running a youth weekend for leaders in Girls Brigade. And he spoke about this year out that they had, running in conjunction with Vis-a-Vis and Girls Brigade. And I really felt God speaking to me that I needed to leave my job as a journalist and go and do that year out. And I didn't know why. It was a bit of a shock, but I did do that. And God sent me to Billericay Baptist Church.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we've had children's workers, we've had youth workers, but you're a children and youth pastor. We'll come on to that in a little bit. So Corinne, why the sort of change from what we've had as the norm, if you like, to what we've got now with Katie?
Well, I have to say, as a church, we had a rather shocking watershed moment, really, which was the end of December 21, as we suddenly found ourselves without our team for all sorts of reasons, none of which were anybody falling out or anything like that. But because you always have to ask that question, don't you? And that included our then children's worker, which was a part-time role at the time. She'd finished after many years with us. Our then youth worker Gary was extremely ill. And so it just drove the church to its knees, really, not only for the children and youth, but for the church. And it became such a period of prayer, not just for the leadership, for the whole church. And we just asked God, where do you want us to go? Why have you sort of given us a blank sheet of paper? What's next? And one of the things that was really key was the biggest change probably was that he wanted youth and children to firstly come together and to have the same priority, the same level of importance at the leadership level as well as we put to everything else. And we kind of looked at it as being at the third leg of a three-legged stool to give us real balance. So we had yourself, Wayne, not there at that time with the church. We then also opened ourselves up for a community pastor, also brand new. And then, oh my gosh, let's have something new with the children and youth. But it was a bit of a longer wait, I think, than we'd hoped for to go through that. And And so, you know, that was end of 21, and it wasn't until early 24 that we started to look that we might have a perfect person about to step up.
And so that was that all around the time of, because I think as a church, you got a sense from God, from Isaiah, about say I'm doing a new thing.
Yeah.
So you were journeying with that passage as a church. Is that right?
It's absolutely. And what was interesting is we had been given that before.
Yeah.
And we were looking for this new thing. And I have to tell you, the new thing wasn't an expectation that we were about to lose our entire team for different reasons.
Yeah.
You don't expect that, do you? We kind of think, oh, God's giving us something. Woohoo, it's going to be great. Not actually, I want you to slightly change direction.
Yeah.
And I think that was a hard lesson, but when one was still learning.
Yeah.
This is a new area, so we hope we're going to get it right. And
But interesting for you though, Katie, because so while all this is going on, you're a member of the church, journeying with the church.
Yeah, so I was a member of the church and attending the meetings. I wasn't on the leadership, so I was hearing stuff as a church member in the church members' meetings about this new direction. And as someone who at the time was involved in volunteering in youth, it was exciting. I was involved in the brigades and some mentoring within the church at the time. And it was exciting to think that children and youth was going to be on a priority on an equal level. But at no time did I think at that point, oh, that's me.
Yeah.
That wasn't even in my mind that I would be a pastor or even be qualified or equipped to be a pastor. Yeah.
And so then when we went to the recruitment process, we used Red Balloon to run that for us. What difference did that make?
well, I think we have to first go back a tiny bit. We had actually tried to do it ourselves first.
Right.
And that didn't pan out.
Yeah.
So we then thought we need some help.
Yeah.
And it was great because you had the connection with Red Balloon. It wasn't something we knew about, and they were just great. They helped us completely reshape our whole job spec.
Yeah.
Which also helped us determine what we thought we wanted
It was
under
quite
God.
challenging, wasn't it?
It was
some of the questions
really,
that they were asking us.
really challenging,
Yeah.
and it made us think. And we're like, because we didn't want same old, and it wasn't that we were suggesting anything was wrong with what had been in the past. And I think it's very hard, isn't it, sometimes to say you're trying to change things without in any way being critical of what has gone before. Actually, what went before was just foundation stones. But sometimes the building has to look different as it grows. And so they were absolutely great. And through them, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but we had 138 people apply for this post. I mean, I will have to say quite a lot of those were not in any way appropriate.
Yeah.
But with their help, we didn't have to do all that work either. They took all of that heavy lifting off of us, which was very appreciated. And
Especially for you, who
particularly
you do a lot of that heavy lifting.
and they brought us down to 12 candidates that we really thought we had to sort of investigate and look at properly. Far be it from me to say the very last person to apply on the very last day happened to be a certain Miss Katie Gowland, but I'm not going to mention that here because I don't want everyone to say
I
that.
remember getting the emails from Red Balloon and then almost just the initials of the people.
It was, they gave us initials,
and
didn't
then,
they?
So there was an initial KG. And so I opened it up and sort of read it, Katie Gowland. And that name sounds familiar because I just wasn't expecting it in any way, shape or form.
No,
really.
They didn't prepare us. It was just sent, like the others had been sent.
So Katie, we had this application form from someone called Katie Gowland. Why? Because you always said you would never work for a church.
I knew you were going to predict that.
and here you are.
Yeah, I did actually say that after I'd been a year out volunteer and felt led by God to go and be a teacher. I felt, my year as a trainee youth volunteer, I think did make me say I'm not going to work for a church ever. You know, it's too hard to work for a church. And I was glad that God had called me to be a teacher. But coming back to that point at the end of last year, so obviously I'd been in the church and I'd known about the search for a a pastor for children's and youth, and it never even occurred to me slightly.
Because you never applied on the first time
I did
round.
not
That's
apply
why I
the
thought
first
it's helpful
Or the
to know.
second.
Or the second, indeed. And it had just not been there, and I was, convinced that I was, meant to be a teacher, and that's what I was called to do in my working life, and was blessed by that. But it was different at the end of last year for various reasons. Work was hard, and not that it had not been hard before, but it was hard in a way that I felt perhaps I would struggle to adjust to, I think. So that was the first thing, and that I started to think about changing my job anyway. So maybe I was open, maybe that was just me being open to the possibility of not being a teacher.
Yeah.
Maybe God was sort of positioning you.
Yes, that's how I feel it was. That there was just an opening then in my mind and spirit to something else being there. But I do remember actually seeing the advert again in church one Sunday, and just having this real sense that was something I could do. Not that it was something I should apply for, but just something that I would maybe be able to do. But then obviously all the doubts come in and you think, oh, well, I'm not good enough to do that. I'm not good enough to be a pastor. I've got no experience. I've never worked in a church before. Sure, they're looking for something different. And I remember after the service, Andy spoke to me and he said, you could do that.
Right.
And then, unbeknownst to me, my mum had said, my wonderful mum had said to...
Hi, Patsy.
we should cut that out.
No, please, leave it in.
But had said to Gary, my mum had said to Gary, Katie could do that. And that Gary had said to my mum, well, she needs to apply.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gary.
But she then didn't share that with me.
Right.
Oh.
So Andy and I had a discussion, and this was really towards the end of the process of when the
And coming up
applications
to the
were
cut-off
closing,
date.
Yeah, about whether I should apply. And he said, because I was expecting him to say no. I was expecting him, because he's, quite averse to change in that way. We like our life, you're in your job, we know what we're doing. And he just said, yeah, go for it. And he surprised me. I don't know why, because he's a great person, but he surprised me in his just openness to exploring that possibility. So I thought, well, I better speak to someone about it. So I did speak to Gary about whether he thought I would be even appropriate to apply for the role. Because I had this nagging in my spirit about it, just I couldn't stop thinking about it, about whether it was the right thing. And he again said, yeah, I think you could.
And so that's often how the Holy Spirit works, isn't it? It's if you can't put it down.
Yeah.
Yes.
It just keeps coming back. Because that was the same for me with BBC, because I wasn't going to apply, because I didn't think, no, they're not going to look at me.
Yeah.
But I just couldn't, what is it about this church? I just couldn't put it down. So it's a similar thing.
And it is similar. I spoke to Fiona, one of the elders, about it to just get a different perspective, because perhaps I thought, I'd known Gary quite well, but maybe I didn't know Fiona as well. What would she think about me applying? And she also was encouraging to me about, searching, I think, about exploring more what God might be doing in it. And
it's interesting because neither of them spoke to any of us.
No.
They all kept your confidence.
Yeah.
So none of us were at all aware. So like when we got that email, it was like, ooh. But I can remember you telling me in the past that often God gets you to wait for things. And I just find it really interesting that you've made us walk that journey in a sense. You've made us wait for you. Because isn't that true, that that's something that you'd said, and that there was us having waited, even put the application out before. Yeah. But that time wasn't quite the right timing, and yet you think now was. How does that kind of fit in?
The theme of waiting does go through my Christian life. When God said something to me, that's not to say that I think that ages ago he said to me that I would be a pastor or anything like that. But I do feel that there was that initial call to come to Billericay Baptist Church, to work in the church, but that wasn't for then.
Yes.
And then all of the equipping and the things that I was doing with God through all of those years, all the experiences I had in work, but also in life, the struggles and the good times, I think were God's way of preparing, not in a waiting for something that I knew was going to happen, but in a waiting perhaps for something that I didn't know was going to happen, that he knew was going to happen, but that I didn't.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, yeah, during that time when I was deciding whether to apply, I was aware that there was a deadline coming up. But, there was a lot of doubts about whether it would be the right thing to apply as somebody who'd been in church, from that church, or whether you were looking for an external candidate, whether I had the right kind of qualities as a pastor. Because it wasn't just a worker. I knew that I had the skills to be a children's or youth worker, but the pastor aspect, yeah.
But I find it interesting how I always find it interesting how God works. So you're like, well, should I apply, should I not, and those kind of things. I had felt God had placed something within me that I remember saying to Gary, surely there's somebody within our own church.
You'd actually said that to me quite a few months earlier. Yeah.
You know, we're a church that has that in our DNA, that we've called from within. And then I had an email from somebody from church who said, because we still hadn't got anywhere, and it was after a church meeting, and somebody emailed me and said, I'm sure there'd be somebody within our own church who would be good for this. I just don't know who.
Yeah.
And so then hearing your story and knowing those things, it's just how God marries the two
together.
And I love it when he does that. You know, it's a bit like, what's his name, from the A-Team. You know, with his big cigar. I love it when the plan comes together. You know, just this sense of God's smile over this. You know?
And I think maybe those things also was preparing us.
That's right.
Because I think we decided to use Red Balloon and to be open to casting our net as wide as we could, so that nobody could suggest that we'd just pick somebody just for convenience or anything like that. But actually, I think God suggesting it could be somebody from within, even though at that time nobody had come forward, it was opening our eyes to possibilities, and I think it made us more open when you did apply, because that for us, you didn't know that had been going on in the background.
No.
It had been for some months. We've been praying into that specifically. Should it be somebody from within?
Yeah.
But still there was nobody coming forward. So we just thought, just let it go, lay it down, let the process run and see what God wants to do. So I think it is interesting that often it's also preparation.
Yeah, very much so.
Too.
But you did apply.
At the very last minute.
Yeah, but you did. It's
did.
Okay. But you just said that you were still umming and ahhing and still had your doubts.
Yeah.
So what was it that kind of tipped it, that made you say, okay, I'm going to send it?
I mean, Andy, really.
So it's his fault.
Yeah, it's his fault. Just because he...
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, I was going to say
We had a day where we were going out together without our children for his birthday and our anniversary, and in the morning we were talking about it, and I said, if I'm going to apply, I have to apply today.
Yeah.
What do you think? You know, should I apply? Will it be embarrassing to apply? And then you know, those kind of. And he said, no, just you should push the door, because God can only say no.
Yeah.
And you did.
I mean, he's quite wise, Andy, when he tries.
Yeah. He just has to try really hard, doesn't he? Yeah.
So, but we won't tell him.
No, you won't see this.
You'll
That's
never
fine. No, you'll never know. So, Corinne, to bring you back in, what was the difference? Almost that aha moment with Katie, because we had some good candidates.
Yeah.
You know, because there was one especially that
Yes.
actually we would have really loved, but it just wasn't right for this role.
Exactly, yeah.
know.
Well, the way we did the interviews, as you might remember, was in 2 stages.
Yeah.
So we firstly did a Zoom with those we thought we might like to go forward with, and that's what we then used that to whittle it down to the last bit. And there was something about that first Zoom call. It was almost as if we weren't using technology. The Holy Spirit just put such a lovely unity between the 4 screens, is how I sensed it. And when we were chatting, you weren't talking about the application, or you were saying, and then we could do this, and then we could do that, and I've had this idea about this. And it was as if it was our first day talking about how to make the role work. I don't know if you recall that, Wayne.
Yeah.
And it was almost as if all the interview stuff had already happened, and we were just really listening to your heart of what God had put into you about what could happen next with the children and young people, and maybe their parents, and maybe, you know, and different age groups and all sorts. And it was just, I just was floating by the end of that time. And we hadn't even had the next bit of the interview yet. So for me, that was just such a huge Holy Spirit moment. And I just had to allow myself to keep open, if you know what I mean. But I think at that stage, I felt God had said, this is who this needs to be, in my heart.
Yeah. Well, I'll be honest with you, I wasn't sure before then. And I thought, because I was obviously new, I was, okay, how is this going to work? Because you've got this relationship with all these people already and all of that kind of stuff. And I had said to the others that were part of this search process, I kind of not put the kibosh on it or the brakes on it, but said, look, can we treat you in the same way that we would treat everybody else? So let's not run ahead with ourselves. But then when we heard from you, what I felt we heard was not your experience, it was your heart. And that for me was the difference. Lots of the others that we heard from, we heard great experience, been doing a similar kind of role in other places. So they had the experience, but just didn't hear their heart. And it didn't, once we'd heard from you, and I said to them, I'm happy to change my mind here, you know? And it was like, it doesn't bother me that you've never been a church pastor or anything like that, because I heard your heart. And I thought, you know, a friend of mine once said, passion trumps experience every time. You know, and that's all. I thought, oh yeah, I like that. You know, it trumps gifting, it trumps everything. But the fact that yes, you were and are gifted in children and young people and strategy and leadership and those kind of things, but we heard your heart, and that's what spoke to me.
Yeah, I'd agree.
So where do you see God in all of this?
Really, I think, as in all things, God loves you through it, doesn't he? That's how I feel. That he knows what you need, and he knows where you need to be. And he gives you the opportunities when the opportunities need to be there. I don't think I would have sought this. I don't think I would have sought leadership in this kind of way. I've always been somebody who's been happy to lead in a more relational way, and not ever as, you know, put my head above the parapet kind of leader.
Oh, your head's there now.
Yeah, I know.
Don't worry, there'll be lots of relationships going on as well.
But more that I think, so I see God in the way that he's prepared just my family for it.
How do they feel about it?
So they've always been really excited, which has been such a blessing, because I was worried about Florence and Theodora, whether they would worry if Mummy was going to be in charge at church. No, they've been really excited and proud and just, you know, really encouraged. And I think for me has been huge. And then Andy's been massively encouraging through it too. But I feel that God prepared us in our marriage for now. I feel all of that, and in our parenting.
Yeah.
So I see God at work in his love, in our family, but also in the church and in the relationships maybe that I have with our church family too, preparing those kind of grounds and the things that I've been involved in with different people over the years and things. So I see God in that hugely. In the role, I think I've shared before, I think my biggest passion is for children to really know Jesus, to really know God through his word, but also to experience God, because that's been such a big part of my journey. And probably, as I say this, my youth leader is sitting out in the congregation from when I was in youth group, and just the way that people poured into my life as a child and a young person, and continue to do through church and brigades. God's in all of that. I think you said the other day, I can't remember if it was in a meeting or whatever, there's that element that God is, I think it was in the baptisms, that God is always with us. And that's something that as we get baptised, we know, don't we, that we take that presence of God in us with us always.
And I think as well, I've really saw it in the reaction of members. Because other than the people you chose to confide in, it then was just a very small group of us that knew what was going on. And although we were really clear to share with the church the entire process, as openly and as transparently as we could, we also wanted to keep it really confidential because you were part of the church, I cannot tell you the positivity of the reaction that has come. And to me, that is a further confirmation of the unity of God that we have in the role that you're now in. Because
I've been overwhelmed by that.
Just so you know, it's just been wonderful.
And just the love of the church members.
The number of people who have come up to me and said, Katie would be great.
Yeah.
She'd be great at this role.
Yeah.
And
I've had people say, why didn't you just ask her before? Sorry.
I might have said no. God hadn't prepared me at
But it's
that
interesting,
point.
isn't it? I think once people know and can see that you are then the person for a time such as this, we don't know how long that time is, but for now, I think many people kind of go, oh yeah, why didn't we just see that before?
Yeah.
But actually it's also about God's timing. And you mentioned about the girls and your marriage. When they were younger, they still needed you a bit more. And you may not have been able to have done this and things like that. So I think, our whole life is important to God, isn't it?
I think so.
And our ministry comes out of our whole life. It's not like an add-on or just a job or something. And that's true of all of us, whether we're paid for ministry or not. And I just think he needed you to wait and not apply on that first time we tried.
Yeah.
Because actually, other things weren't ready.
No.
And his timing is always perfect.
And it is. What
are you excited about?
I'm excited, I think, really about the vision for children and youth being spread across the whole church. I think that excites me, that everybody captures that vision. And we have had a legacy of such amazing teaching in children's work and youth work. And I see that in the lives of my own children as they've benefited from that, but in the lives of so many children and young people who've gone through our church over the 20 odd years that I've been here and been involved. But I feel this excitement that as a whole church, as we, all the streams are linked up, that there's that shared vision for children and youth as much as there is for, the church and community, and that it's everybody's role, really, to help the children and youth as part of the wider church to know God better through his word and to experience him through his spirit.
I don't think I could have summed it up any better, do you?
No, brilliant. Thanks, Katie. Thanks,
Thank
Corinne.
you.
This has been the first episode of Only Pastors in the Building.
Brilliant.
And, some of you will get that, some of you
We
won't.
can have our own podcast.
Yeah, we could, couldn't we? But it's been great. Wonderful to celebrate with you today. Bless you.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.